We're now live with the March 25th edition of the Node.js modules team. We've got a full agenda for us today, and we've already got a topic I think people are wanting to talk about. We were talking about refactoring, but I think that Guy, might already be gone. We missed it. Okay. We were talking about refactoring, and then the first thing we have the agenda here is the fix extension searching for exports. Does anyone have a preference what we get kicked off with?
I mean, I think the refactoring discussion fits in with the exports one, so it's probably best we just start with the exports.
Okay, so fix extension searching for exports, number 32351. Does anybody want to take introducing this item? I can do so then. My understanding, and then anyone who, if I get this wrong, please feel free to interrupt and correct. But the export map has like a left-hand sign, which is a specifier. The right-hand side is the file that specifier references. When exports themselves were spec'd out and put together, it was done with kind of the intention and philosophy that all of the references would be static, that like the thing on the right-hand side would be like the full file path that things would write to, with one of the strong ideas being that this is something that could be turned into an import map through like some sort of transform. What I believe ended up happening though was that we deferred to the CommonJS resolver for CommonJS modules with the specifier, and unintentionally enabled extension searching and I think potentially indexing, like the /index.js resolving pattern that only exists in the CJS resolver and not the ESM resolver. As this, in my opinion at least, was not an intention in the initial implementation, it is viewed by a handful of folks as being a bug, not being a feature of this. And in general, with the export maps, we've been trying extremely hard to make sure that the feature works the same for both CommonJS and ESM. So Guy opened a pull request to fix the extension searching to ensure that the experience for both CommonJS and ESM module consumers would be the same. Jan, as you were heavily involved in exports, did I miss anything, or was that anything to add? And then we've got Wes with their hand up.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add is the impact. So it means that people who are currently adding exports to their packages and primarily testing or only testing those values with require will ship packages that unintentionally don't work with import, because import will try to resolve the exports and it will not work. So those packages only work with require for no good reason, basically.
Wes, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so just to confirm my understanding here, this is about the behavior of when the right-hand side of the export map specifier path pair ends in a slash and you expose a folder, right?
No, it detects everything. It is just generally whenever you use require and it resolves to something in the export map, after resolving from the export map, it will also do the full CommonJS style search with extension searching, directory searching, all the things.
Oh, I have different opinions on the trailing slash case versus the non-trailing slash case. Specifically, the without a trailing slash, I think it's pretty clear that export specifier logic says you want to expose exactly the one thing that it looks at without like post-processing it to anything. And so that I think definitely should be fixed. But the trailing slash case conceptually is expose this folder. And so I think continuing to do extension searching or index lookup or what have you within that folder is not only intentional, but expected.
So to clarify, Wes, it's not turning it off when you deep search into that folder. It would be that like if you did the slash, it wouldn't automatically look for the index. So like if you did I'll do an example here. Require my module /deep/thing, right? And in the export map, you only had my module, like you had deep slash defined.
Yeah.
Thing would still get all of the CommonJS resolution stuff happening. It just, you wouldn't want my module /deep to automatically search for the index, I think.
Can you type out the exports you think would go with that? Because I think we often get, or at least I'm getting confused about left-hand side versus right-hand side. Like if you put deep slash in the left-hand side, that means something in exports. But if you put it in the right-hand side, that's where
that's what I'm
okay.
what I'm saying. So like as you deeply go into that folder, I don't think that there's any debate about what happens as you go deeply. That's the CommonJS resolution algorithm. It's just like my module /deep should not automatically get the index, or my module with no slash should not automatically do the CommonJS resolution algorithm.
Oh yeah, because if you expose deep slash, that means deep slash handles all specifiers that end with deep slash, and so my module /deep isn't mapped and so shouldn't be exposed.
Yes,
I agree with that.
So this is very specifically about like an export map that was like, sorry, I'm trying to like copy paste and.
Well, just real quick with the last two lines you just pasted before you paste your new one in.
Yeah.
I agree here that if you try to require or import deep without a trailing slash, it doesn't exist. It should error out. And if you try to import or require, so the question is, if you require deep slash, then the current behavior you're saying is path to deep slash gets dumped into the CJS resolver. And the behavior you're expecting is what?
This is one of those cases where I don't think anybody's realistically going to say require with a trailing slash on it in the real world. And so like,
I mean,
so the example that I just showed below is the one that I think that we're trying to avoid, where right now you can use that in the export map. In ESM, it will fail. In CommonJS, it will do the searching and append the file extension.
It'll fail, you mean, assuming that submod is a folder?
A folder with an index.js inside it?
No, if you had /lib/submod.js, my understanding is that right now, the export that I shared there would fail for the ESM loader, but pass for the CommonJS module.
Yeah, that should be, I think that should be fixed. That's not intended.
And my understanding is, and then Jan may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, that is what Guy's pull request is fixing.
Yeah, like that's fine. I just want to be sure that the folder exposing case still actually does do the extension searching and lookup thing, because the folder case exposing the whole folder and thereby implying that all the CJS lookup logic still happens within that folder makes a lot of sense to me.
So my understanding with the way the algorithm works is that with the folder lookup, the exports resolver is only being used to resolve the path, and then that's handed to the CJS resolver.
Right. I mean, yeah, but clearly, like what's happening right now is we're just always handing the path to the CJS resolver. So I just don't want to accidentally break it so that we never pass it to the CJS resolver.
Yeah. I can even go for it.
I think the desired behavior with a PR at least is that exports resolves completely as defined using the exports mapping, and it will never pass it to the CommonJS resolver. Because if we do it for directories, we are back to square one on the problem that you would have something that works via require and fails via import.
I mean, so the directory mappings they're exposing an entire directory. They aren't like what you do with the fact that a directory is exposed. Like you can't really create a whole path. You have to do some processing, whether that's concatenating another path to it or concatenating another path and then doing some sort of lookup.
Well, and if there's an ESM, if there's a package JSON in that directory, ESM would pick it up too, wouldn't it? It would pick up whatever the main is.
No, the export resolution is in ESM absolute. Like after exports is resolved, that is the file name. There's no further processing at all. exports resolves to a absolute URL. Like after exports processing is done, that is the final URL in import. There's no further searching or post-processing afterwards.
I guess the thing that's coming up, and I'm going to build and try to test, would be like, we claim that this should be like a replacement for what people are currently using deep searching for. So I can imagine in the CommonJS case where someone wants to map a folder, the deep modules in that folder should be able to drop. It seems like they should be able to drop the extension, but maybe I misunderstood where this pull request was coming from.
If you expose a directory in the exports, if you use a trailing slash mapping in exports,
yeah,
it means that the resolution is the concatenation of the remainder onto the mapped path.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are using import, you cannot leave off any extensions while accessing it. You can't.
I've always used the concatenation as like the implementation of where the actual logic is. I want to say these are the resources that I want to expose at some endpoint. The concatenation just being the implementation of that at the time. I don't think the concatenation is like the be all and the end all and the actual desired end goal necessarily in any cases. It's all about what resources you actually want to make public.
Right, but in ESM, because there is no searching, it is also the end result. Like if you say,
yeah, but that seems like an implementation.
So for example, well, it is not only an implementation detail because, for example, import meta resolve allows you to resolve to a directory potentially, and it cannot do the searching and cannot treat this two as equivalent.
Well, no, my point is quite simply for the ESM resolver, like it still is just concatenation because it doesn't do any extension searching or lookup within directories. And so if you end with a directory, you end with a directory. There's nothing more it's going to do with it. But for CJS needing to do more with the directory, that makes sense to me.
Well, the fundamental problem is if we do that, if we say, hey, for CommonJS, we pass it forward to the extension to the expansion logic that CommonJS does for relative requires and stuff. If we do that, then we end up with packages where the README says, hey, you just use the following specifier and those instructions will work for require, but will fail when you try to use the same instructions with import, which seems incompatible with how we would want people to treat exports. It's supposed to abstract away the differences between how specifiers are mapped, and if we allow cases where
I want to rationalize this in this way to get the behavior where you have the CommonJS deep exposure. You cannot replicate that by writing out a like explicit map easily. However, you can make it so that all of the specifiers do work in both the ESM and the CJS resolver by adding a couple more explicit entries to that like CJS blanket exposure with like a dedicated conditional field for the require entries versus the ESM entries. So like once you take this behavior away, there's no way to get it back or anything close to it.
So I have a question. Why, if I'm using ESM and I specify a path to a directory inside a package, why does that not reference its package.json? Like there's already a chain of package JSONs through node modules, right? What's wrong with a chain of package JSONs relatively, like within the project? Like I get why like extension resolution and auto index and like, I get why that stuff doesn't come into play for ESM, right? But like if I have a package JSON in that folder, like with exports, why should that not also apply?
Basically because exports only applies for bare specifiers, and inside of the package, we are not using bare specifiers. Like export is explicitly defined for a specific prefix of bare specifier, prefix pattern. We didn't define it for relative references.
Was that an MVP, or did we, like, I'm trying to remember, did we very much not want it to do that, or did it just not seem important in this initial version?
Right. So from my perspective, it is working as intended, because my goal with exports was to have a data structure that can be used for static resolution using just the top level metadata that comes from package.json in a package. So that in theory, if you just get the metadata about the packages without downloading any files from the packages, you can build a resolution structure. You can do static analysis using it.
I see. Like you want to
if
basically
we-
get all the pacuments and none of the tarballs and be able to construct all
Yeah.
the exports.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as soon as we allow random directories to be involved in that, we lose that property.
And you're only concerned about that property for import.
Right. For require, everything is out of the window anyhow, because require can do
Even
all
with
kinds of
exports, you're saying
random
that
stuff.
that property is unachievable for CommonJS.
Well, require extensions is a thing, and a bunch of
Okay.
Like
Okay.
require resolution is complex enough that I
Right.
don't think it's achievable realistically.
And the likely existence of loaders which is identical to require.extensions, like that doesn't change your math here, because that's still just like, is that just something
It's
you
an
can
opt-in.
statically decide in advance?
Basically, if you use a loader that doesn't maintain this guarantee, you are opting into losing the guarantee.
Okay.
But for example, a random third-party package couldn't assume, generally speaking, that a certain loader is being used by an application. So the ecosystem at large should be compatible with the assumption.
Okay.
I'd also note that there's a big difference with require extensions. Loaders were built in such a way that they can run ahead of time. That is very much not true with how you manipulate the CommonJS loader.
Do we know how many packages have been published with exports that the guy's PR will break? Like I know that all of mine, I actually did put the full path in there. So I don't think it will actually break any of mine, but I'm wondering if there's been any research into that. The fact that we can technically get away with it is a separate concern. I think it would be still useful to know what the breakage will be.
We don't have a up-to-date data set for our npm search tools from the Node side of things to actually do such a search, since it was unflagged. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, go ahead.
Anecdotally, I can say that one reason that both Guy and myself were surprised by the Babel case is that we saw exports being used in multiple packages and always used the full paths. So it seems like this is the outlier, but it's hard to tell without, as Bradley said, having a natural data set.
Not to block the PR, but is that something we could figure out perhaps before it gets released? Or like very soon, so that we can, reach out? I don't know what's involved, because I know that.
I can run a Gisneminid query, but it'll take a couple days.
If you give me a second, I actually have like a BigQuery thing that I could run against package JSONs.
Yeah, anyway, we don't have to figure it out in the scope of this meeting or to block the PR. I was just curious.
Well,
I think it would be useful to know.
The timing thing on this, Jordan, is we have a 13.x release that's planned for today.
Okay, and you want to get this into it?
And I would want to get this into it if possible.
I mean, so that's fine, but even if tomorrow we could get a list of what the breakages today's release caused, so that we could reach out and like get them fixed, that's still, I think, valuable and a good mitigation. I certainly hope it doesn't break anyone, and I'm pretty confident none of my packages will break, so that's good. But, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what was that?
Just agree that yes, impact analysis is pretty important here. I agree with you.
I feel like it would be, if I could just interject, I feel like it'll be pretty low because this isn't documented behavior, and exports is only documented on the atmospheric module section of the docs. Like we haven't even added it to the CommonJS module section of the docs yet. So I feel like there can't be that many packages. Sure, but I feel like there can't be that many.
We already know that Babel.
Okay. But aside from that one package, I would think there shouldn't be that many that are using exports, especially for a CommonJS only package.
So the thing that we would be able to do, and this is one of the things I like about the 13.x release, is like we can do a bunch of research, but one of the easiest ways to tell that we break people, for better or for worse, is to break them and have them open issues. So like one thing that we also can do, for better or for worse, and this is part of the reason why it's good that this stuff is still experimental with a clear warning, is we could just break it on 13. We haven't backported it to 12 yet, and see what issues come in and see what happens.
Yeah, and what I
mean,
wanted to warn about is in terms of how many packages are affected. The problem with exports is that it's very popular with people who maintain very popular packages, because it's kind of exactly tailored to people that have many people that use their code. So if there's even 2 or 3, that could be like a wide, like we build every single build, we break every single build that uses Node 13 point something. So I think it is a very risky change at this point, because exports has shipped and people are using Node 13 in some contexts. So one way or another, we should know what happens.
The project does explicitly have like a support contract here, and like, well, it would be bad that we break people. It's not outside of the contract that we've made with developers who utilize both the current release line and experimental features on it.
The real question is,
I'm not saying that we have. Go ahead, Wes. Sorry.
The real question is, if we break them and decide that we broke them too much, would we change it back in the next release?
I don't think so. I mean, this is definitely broken behavior. Like someone who publishes a CommonJS package, that CommonJS package should work with consumers who are accessing it via require as well as import. If they explicitly define conditions that say, I want import to behave differently, then that's fine. Then they've like defined that behavior.
In that case, if we're not going to consider the ability to undo this change because we think that it's partial or incomplete or bad, then we want to ship it correctly the first time because we're not going to change it again, right? We don't want to ship something that's like half breaks a lot of things that we didn't mean to.
Well, I mean, we always want to ship something correct the first time.
I mean, the point is, doesn't that mean it's prudent to actually do the coverage check rather than shipping it without doing that?
I mean, if we can do it quickly and still make the whatever that deadline was, that sounds ideal. Is that possible?
I'm just rejoining now. What is the coverage check? Sorry, if you can just recap the requirement there.
Determining which NPM packages might be broken by your PR, if there are any.
I can run a check on that possibly. He was requesting.
I was curious, not as a blocking the PR question, but as a it seems useful to know what the impact is going to be. I said before you were on the call that not all of my packages are actually using the full path, so I don't think it'll break any of them. So.
It's a follow-up.
So there are currently about just under 400 packages on NPM shipping the exports field, and it seems to be growing at about 3 packages a day, as far as I can tell, just from sort of ad hoc checks. So my feeling with it is that the longer we wait, the worse that break is getting. If the next release is in a month, I'm not sure what the exact timing is, but if you think 3 packages a day times 30 days, that's potentially another 100 packages which could break. So that's why there was a sort of a sense of urgency that if it is something that's going to cause breaking issues, the sooner we can do it, the better. And it's a pretty clear-cut semantic. It's not like there's things to be worked out here.
I guess the question would be like, what's the very top of that list? Like if you sort it by popularity or sort it by dependence, like if there's any Babels or Lodashes at the very top, we should probably reach out to them.
Preact and Babel had a bug that was related to this, which was actually a mistake. they've got path exports in one of their sub packages, and in one of the path exports they left out the extension, all the others had the extension. They didn't realize that they needed to include the extension. So it was working fine with require, but then as soon as someone were to use import, it would have broken. So I sent a PR to Babel on that already, anticipating the semantic change. But yeah, those kind of reachings out are important to ensure that people aren't just confused why things suddenly broke. I can potentially go through and check a few more because I do have that information.
I would just say, like, if there are any that like scream, like if Lodash is at the top of the list, or like anything like that that's extremely popular, we should maybe try to reach out to them before we land this, if this affects them. Because I assume most of them are probably using exports the way Jordan is, where it's like not assuming searching. So there might not be anyone that we need to fix.
Yeah, I don't know of any other major ones that have that issue, but it's worth double checking. And
actually, the pre-act, we would break pre-act in the example that Michael is putting here, because this is actually an interesting one to consider, right? People who are using exports early and they want to land it in a semver minor. Preact is including / map to / to ensure that any people who are deeply searching into the module in the past will not actually have that break on them. And that will break that pattern. Because in CommonJS prior to this change, deep searching would have the full resolution algorithm. Whereas after this change, they would need to include the full file extension.
Right. This is why I said for like the directory exposing case, it should still do the CommonJS lookup stuff.
And I think that maybe I'm leaning in that direction as well, but I haven't completely decided.
But arguably that's a bug too, because that's the bug that, like, the flip side is that when you allow that, you get what was reported as a bug to Babel, where, hey, the CommonJS package worked with require but not with import.
And the flip side of that is that means us saying that an export map of / to / is the same as not having an export map is a lie.
Yeah, it makes introducing an export map always semver major. That's the result of this change without that without the folder map bit.
And the thing is, like, you can always, if you want to like not do this for your ESM consumers, for your new ESM consumers, you could have a conditional export where you do / to / for your CJS consumers, and then only expose specific things for ESM consumers. That way, only your ESM consumers have a breaking change, which probably when you do this, you have no ESM consumers yet. So like the folder exposure case, like the primary use for the folder exposure is for backwards compatibility. So I'm not seeing the argument for making it work without any of the searching logic.
Well, the other thing is, as was discussed in the chat, the property that Jan was interested in preserving already doesn't work if there's conditional exports, right? Which is that, like, you cannot, I think, right? Which is that you can't ensure that the whole graph is static if those are being used.
You can't ensure that the specifier resolves to the same URL in ESM and CJS.
Right. So given that guarantee is already not there, and that there's been a lot of desire expressed for consistency between CJS and ESM in exports, and given that, we may want the directory resolution or the lookup stuff to apply to the exposed directories, do we want to let the ESM thing also check package JSONs in folders? And then just say, if you want that property, don't expose folders?
May I quickly?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Conditional exports doesn't change the property. The property still applies. You can still do a static lookup. It will be a static lookup that needs to know the condition set, but it's still a static lookup just based on the top level metadata. So if it wouldn't be an import map as it's currently spec'd, for example, just because import maps as they're currently spec'd do not allow any kind of fallback or variance. But you could, for example, render out a set of import maps keyed off by the condition set, and then you could you would be back to a completely static resolution relative to the condition set. So
couldn't you do that too with nested package JSONs that have export maps?
no, because you would have to have those nested package JSONs which aren't available without downloading the source code.
Okay.
So the property is currently maintained, at least from all that I'm aware of. There's definitely the possibility that we can allow this for require, and I think Guy has had multiple possible workarounds, like for example, warning if you do it in require, saying, hey, what you're currently doing will not actually work if you would switch to import, making a lot more elaborate errors on import if, hey, you're importing something that assumes that require resolution would happen and your current specifier would have to be changed to the following. There are ways to do it, but all of them put the work on the consumer side, which is the majority of users. If we make this breaking change right now, the work is on the author side, which is the smallest group of users. So I'd much rather make it a little bit harder on the authors, that they would have to, if they want to say, hey, I'm adding exports and I don't want it to be a breaking change, then export all the possible paths if you really want to be sure. Like the /export was a way to, for example, expose things like package JSON, which for the most part then kind of works. I think that for the most part, we would not break preact because, at least from what I'm aware of, they don't really need this.
I think that we would break them, Jan.
We
could follow
may
up.
break them.
My understanding was that they released the export map, was unaware that they broke deep searching and broke a bunch of their downstream consumers, and adding the / as kind of like an escape hatch was the way in which they resolved to not just completely remove the feature altogether. But
Right.
before I speak
But
too much,
they
we've
still
got
have-
Corey and Guy with their hands up.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, we might break some people, and yes, it might break some packages that in a minor version added exports. I think that at least since modules have been released now, to some degree, adding exports is a breaking change, generally speaking. So I think we should be treating it as such. And authors, yes, it might require a major version to add exports. You are adding some kind of lockdown. So I think that is a fair change of assumptions. But at the same time,
that means, Jan, then that dual mode modules are now a Semver major change, which was a huge reason why we pushed for exports in the first place, was to allow a way to do it in a Semver minor way.
Adding exports is a breaking change. Adding the ESM version doesn't have to be once you have exports.
Yes.
Yeah.
So part of our discussion through the process was that it's okay to first have to have a breaking change in order to position your API such that then adding ESM or converting to, or changing to ESM is not a breaking change. So I think adding the exports field is a breaking change most of the time already. Like there's only essentially the only cases are the ones Jan outlined, which is you have to exhaustively list every possible file path, including tests and anything you publish in your package in exports, and then it's not a breaking change, but that's the only one.
Yeah.
You'd also have to list every possible CJS path, meaning with extension, without extension, with / without /. I mean, it's not practical.
That doesn't sound so terrible to me. I mean, there are tools for that. Packages don't have that many files in them.
Yes, they absolutely do. All 200 of my packages have all their tests published. Please feel free to write a tool and I will show you how impractical it is.
We do have some actual numbers on that. It is completely impractical. For a small Oak Cliff program that's got around 17 files outside the library, you're looking at 16,000 paths if you have just the raw absolute paths of ability to require something, and it does parse as JavaScript.
It's worth noting that this is why we have exports, in order to bring that down and make things more semantically understandable. From a
Like-
public consumer perspective, we don't want there to be 16,000 sub imports of a package.
Right, and my point is, like, if you don't use the folder export, I think that we should enable that. Like, if you want to expose exactly specific endpoints, that's what we should be doing for the non-folder exports. But the folder wildcard re-export is for exposing the entire folder as a resource, right? Which CGS consumers expect that resource to do the folder
Right.
lookups and
So-
extensions and.
So what if we just have the extension searching for that case only then, and
Right, like, you
have it
weren't
for the
he-
folders?
You weren't here. That's the argument I was trying to make. That's exactly what I was saying we should do.
But let's say we do
Okay.
that, then is it possible to expose a folder and have that anything within that folder be reachable by ESM? Or would I have to, is the only way I have to explicitly do the full file?
Well, right now you have to do it explicitly anyway without exports. If you're importing from ESM and you don't have exports, you still have to do it explicitly. It's not going to do extension checking on packages.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What I mean is if I currently have a package with the exports field that exposes a folder, I understand that, like, or so yeah, like, and then my question is, if I can require CJS style things inside it, but I can't import anything inside it unless it's an actual file in the file system and I include the full path to it. Is that right?
Yeah, if it's a folder mapping, you need to use the exact path from ESM. But for CommonJS, we could potentially still allow the extension searching maybe as a.
So this goes back to my question then, is for folder imports or folder exposing, is there a reason why if that folder contains a package JSON for ESM, it couldn't use the exports map in there? And I understand that that takes away a little bit of Jan's desired property of being able to only look at the documents, but like, it seems like the solution is don't use folder exports if that's something that matters.
So, I mean, we have a Turing complete runtime. Asking if we can't do something is a little bit not
Well,
a useful question.
Can we get a series, a lack of objections to do it is the primary question.
Sorry, can you just clarify
object-
what you're suggesting, Jordan?
I'm suggesting that I have a nested folder inside a package that contains another package JSON that has an exports mapping. And that at the top level, I expose that nested folder. And then with require, of course, it already follows the CJS resolution and it goes through the package JSON. But I'm asking, could we also make it so that if I import the path to that folder, it gives me, and I can then nest through
the
it
only
using
the only way
exports in
you
that
can
package
get
JSON.
access to nested mappings is if you're using self-resolution. If you're using self-resolution, then you will default to getting the nested mapping. So if you inside that folder have an index or something,
I'm sorry, I
load,
mean from
you can,
without. I'm saying like,
yeah. So
I'm
from the outside,
like,
you can't get
yeah.
any of the nested. The only way to get access to nested is through self-resolution for nested exports.
Hey, everyone, I'm
So-
sorry to interrupt for a
Okay.
second, but Corey has had their hand up for a while, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to speak.
So I just wanted to say that I actually agree with, I think, what Wes is saying. If I'm exposing, for example, / to /, my expectation is that any path that I require or import will go through the require or import resolver. So I would expect that certain paths would work in CJS but would not work in ESM. On the other side, for exports which specify an explicit destination, I kind of expect that that should be the full path, as I think is what's being recommended in this PR. Sorry, did I lose the connection?
We heard you.
No, I think people are digesting. And just a quick time check, we've got 12 minutes.
I mean, well, how about this? I mean, why don't we start with just locking down the extension searching and leaving the folders open, and I guess see what the impact is of that. And then we could decide whether or not to do the folder thing as a separate PR.
It's true. Minimally, there's no disagreement here about the non-folder case. Like we all think that the non-folder case should be explicitly you're exposing this resource. Like that is what it is.
And just to be clear, I wasn't agreeing with that on the PR originally, but I think at this point I've been pretty thoroughly convinced that for files that needs to be the case.
Cool. I also feel like we need to do some more research to see like all these edge cases of folders and deep folders. Like we need to have like a full list of like maybe starting with Preact. What are the various things that people import from Preact and what would break if we change how // works and that kind of thing.
So I guess like the thing that I think is really important for us to consider here is like we are removing that escape hatch. And this is the one thing that gives me hesitation right now when we remove this from the directory. Like I know that some platforms are pretty good at just like, hey, you know, versions are cheap. We'll do a sem ver major whenever we want. But there's also like, you know, there are softwares that are very, very slow at landing sem ver majors. And I am concerned that this could significantly hurt adoption if we make exports have to be a sem ver major change. And I'm pretty sure, but I can check with Jason quickly, that if we did land this change, it will break Preact. I would have to dig up the PR where they landed exports initially. I can't recall if people reported actual breakages or if I flagged on the fact that there might be breakages, so I'd want to double check that. But I do believe that after they released exports, they broke people, and it was specifically deeply searching for the package JSON. And in this example with like the // if people are still requiring thing/package.json, it will work. But if they were requiring Preact/package, like we will break that resolution search that they were doing. Now, maybe adding the extension there is not the end of the world, is like a response that like something that they can come up with. And maybe it's fine that we do this. But I just want to like be explicit about the fact that we are removing the ability for this to be like sem ver minor. Brad, you have your hand up. Jan mentions that he has a direct response to what I said about Preact. Would you mind if he goes first, or are you also directly
You can
responding?
go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, just quickly. My memory of the Preact thing was that they added all the paths they knew about breaking, and those paths are all still explicitly listed. And that is the reason why I was thinking that they might not be broken, because they already exposed all the breakages that they knew about before they added the // export. But also, in the current direction seems to be that we all think that for prefix mappings, for / mappings, via require, we would still do full require style resolution after mapping. And in that case, your concern does not apply about Preact. Am I correct, Miles?
Say that one more time.
If we go with a thing where we still do require style resolution mapping, but only for mappings of the and / only prefix mappings,
Yes.
then everything would be fine.
Exactly. That is
but
literally the only thing I'm worried about. If we took the mental model that I've always had for the folder mapping was the folder mapping was being used to concatenate the path and then handing the path off to the resolver and letting the resolver do its thing. For the individual files, it makes sense. It's a one-to-one thing. And I could see how both mental models make sense here. But for the folder thing, to your point that you were just saying, yes, if we handed it off to the resolvers after concatenating the paths, that would completely alleviate the concerns and, in my opinion, maintain the ability for sem ver minor introductions of both export maps and modules. Brad, you have your hand up?
Sure, a little bit outdated, but I can take on the work to get a new data set that we can query as of today. It's going to take a few days and we can actually get numbers. I actually have a very neutral feeling after all this discussion. It seems like we are getting some guarantees, but as was stated earlier in the discussion, any guarantees about CommonJS are kind of moot, sorry. So for me, this PR doesn't really impact import, which is my only major concern for reliability. I do think we need to have a discussion. I've been trying to reuse the package JSON cache between the ESM Node.js resolver and the CJS resolver. I think if we don't have the exports match exactly, that's fine. We just won't be able to reuse data as well between them. So that's all.
So kind of, I guess with that being said, we have two different paths that we could go right now. And like, to be like clear, like I'm okay with us going either. I'm still kind of digesting the result, like what it would mean myself. One in which we land the PR that's open right now, which keeps it consistent between both, and another where we move the PR to only remove the extension resolution for files, but maintain handing it off to the resolver in the case of directories. Does anybody have a really strong opinion about which one we should move forward with?
I think the second case is much less breaking. And, keeps us in line with there's a backwards compatible way to use exports stuff. So
Guy, as the original author of the PR and someone who I know has a strong opinion about this, what are your thoughts?
I'd be happy to update the PR to still provide extension searching for the path exports for CommonJS. And I mean, we can always come back around on that and add, remove it in future, as Jeffrey said. So it's still a step towards it. So if we've got agreement and everyone agrees on that, I'd be happy to fix up the implementation and ensure we can merge that as soon as possible. I think just getting the file case in for the current release will help avoid a lot of potential bugs for users. And I think that's the main important thing, which would be great to be able to solve now.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't like undermining the original intention of the PR or missing something that you were.
No, I don't think it does.
Cool. Would you, not a rush. I could even take a look at it myself, but I can maybe even push the 13.x release to tomorrow if we can get this landed in short order and get this wrapped in with it.
I'll be in touch with you about it this afternoon.
Okay, let's so I'll follow up with Guy and we'll try to get this out in a release as soon as possible. And I think to the point that we were all talking about before, and this gives us some time to do that research, Brad. I don't think that this should really break anything, and the breakages that it would maybe have would be fairly obvious and fixable with like a couple, like by adding the extension, whereas breaking it in the folder case doesn't really have an alternative because it's removing like a whole use case. So happy to revisit it and do the research and maybe further limit things in the future. Wes, you have your hand up?
So I by and large consider that subject done. I just want to walk back to something that Jordan mentioned earlier in the conversation that I think is like a separate issue that we could tackle separately, but very related. So only come to me once we're done with this.
I think we're done, unless someone else has something to say.
Okay, so Jordan, earlier you mentioned the package JSONs and ESM case. I'm looking at GIST in the chat. Is that roughly the case you want to try and make sure actually works?
Hold on, let me pull it up. And then submod package JSON. Yes. that would be that seems like it would make it would both be a nice feature to have, but it would also make exposing a folder be the same in CJS and ESM, and it would make it relatively trivial to make the same commonly used specifiers work in both module systems.
I actually think that's reasonable because I wrote this expecting this to work. I
mean, to be clear though, from what I understand, is this will break Jan's preference of only being able to look at the pacument, the top level package JSON of all of the dep graph and then construct an exports thing.
Honestly, I don't think that's even actually possible for import maps. Once you consider the fact that once import maps can rely on packages that themselves have import maps, you need to have a recursive import map resolver.
Yeah, but it's still only at the base level of each package. Once you have to go into deeper levels, it's is an added complexity to something that's already a huge complexity on top of the existing resolver, which is already a hugely complex system. Like, as much as possible, resolver simplicity is so important. And I know these edge cases don't always seem like the
other
best,
thing we could do,
I think,
is perhaps ask NPM upon publish to inline all of the nested exports in the top level. Like, it's all statically discoverable once you have the package available. So that's certainly something that, I don't know how willing they would be to do it, but if they did it, then the top level package JSON that you install as well, and the pacument that you can get without even downloading the tarball would all contain all that information.
Provided your package doesn't do something unique, like, install a package itself into one of its subfolders on install, that works perfectly fine.
Sure, but if you do that, it's already,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are at time. The one thing I will mention is the fact that the pattern that you shared, Wes, does work, but for internal self-referential modules. So it actually can already be broken. So I think that this discussion is worth having anyways to decide whether or not we want to limit that possibility altogether. Corey, you've got your hand up?
Yes. So if I understand, the example Wes gave will work with self-reference?
It will work with self-reference, and there's already people who are showing examples of using this to allow .js to be both ESM and CommonJS in the same project. I advise against doing this for the exact same reason that Jan is mentioning about kind of breaking this high level.
I was actually going to recommend for most TypeScript consumers that, at least for now, using a pattern like this to have .js as ESM in the subfolders where you do have .js as ESM, because this is actually much preferable to using two extensions in a lot of cases.
And I think that if we think about this, there may be a way to extend exports to, like, when we do folder mappings, maybe there's a way in which we could add metadata about that folder.
So exports won't compose through nested package JSONs, but the type module lookup will still apply from the most deeply nested package JSON file.
Right.
So you can still achieve that use case.
Right, exactly. So like this as written here, I don't actually need the submod re-export or the file re-export. Like, if I don't include exports at all, this actually works just fine, because it does just go through the type module and the index lookup. So the point is, well, why aren't we looking at the package JSON for like an alternate main entry point for that folder when we find it? Because we're looking there for the type module anyway, right? So why not look at the other information too?
Can I make a suggestion? This is a really interesting topic. We're 2 minutes over. I doubt we're going to solve it in less than 1 minute. Can we kick off an issue to discuss this? Because I think this is actually a really important thing for us to work through.
And if I could just finish my comment, my issue with what you're describing, the current behavior, is I'm actually using self-reference to test the exports of my package. So if it doesn't work the same from the outside and inside, then that test isn't necessarily effective.
That's a really good point, Corey. Brad, did you have something quick you wanted to add?
Yeah, I got requested to add a PR to the agenda. In Node's build scripts, I made a PR to let you change the default package type. People keep bringing this up in various issues. I would like to land it. I just wanted to be sure it's okay to land. This does not let you configure this at runtime. And for the most part, I haven't found many things that actually run if you change the default package type. But people keep bringing up that we can do it. So I made it so they can do it and they can see the results.
So this is just a flag so you can make alternate builds of Node that change the default value of the package type field?
Correct. It does not work very well in reality, but people keep saying they will make it work somehow. So we can let them play.
So one thing I'm still not entirely sure about on that PR is it introduces a type none. And I'm still not 100% clear on the semantics that it introduces there. So it would just be good to double check that.
That was coming from an existing stuff. It doesn't actually introduce it. It's just using the ESM's package.
So there's no
hash
actual implementation of the check for the text none.
Can I stop for 1 second, everyone? We're
Just
going to have to
click it to
stop
the
the
PR.
stream. So goodbye, everyone. Thanks for dialing.